techniques built and based in forcing other country to move, based in using small number of people who can go inside whatever state and create unrest or movement or even a terrorist attack.
Okay, let me bring James in now, because James is nodding in agreement with what you're saying. Do you think that's what this group is going to be used for, James? Not necessarily within the country? You think it's going to be used as a hit group?
No, I think it's probably more likely to be used within the UAE to defend against any potential small-scale Iranian incursion. I mean, theoretically, if Iran is pushed too far, they may seek to disrupt oil supplies in the Gulf. They will find it difficult to blockade the Straits of Hormuz because the Americans will not tolerate that. So I think they will go for some other kind of an option, more deniable option, which will probably mean some kind of infiltration into one or more of the Gulf states to disrupt oil supplies in some way like that.
Phyllis, you disagree?
I disagree. I don't think this is about Iran. I don't think we are seeing any evidence of Iranian manipulation inside the UAE, Iranian threats. Yes, there has been a long-standing border dispute between the UAE and Iran over these three tiny islands, but that has not escalated. We're not seeing provocative moves by Iran. I don't think this has anything to do with Iran. I think this is clearly in response to the threat of the Arab Spring, the threat to the legitimacy and perhaps the stability of these absolute monarchies in these tiny oil-rich but population-poor emirates.
Okay, but isn't it interesting now, Phyllis?
This goes back to the question of let me just finish one thing about. Let me finish the point about the nature of these mercenaries. We're looking at a potentially massive violation of the international law prohibiting the recruitment of mercenaries, possibility of significant violations of U.S. law. I imagine that the State Department fairly soon is going to be pressed to answer whether or not there should be an investigation of Eric Prince for the possibility that he's violating U.S. law as well as international law in exporting perhaps U.S. technology, perhaps U.S. weapons, perhaps U.S. training methods, all of which may be in violation of U.S. law. So this is very much a consequence of the Bush administration's privatization of the war in Iraq on such a massive scale that it set the stage for what we're now seeing of this massive expansion of mercenaries.
Abdulhadi, isn't it a concern that this will be used as the U.S. using a force in your region to fight potentially other Muslims?
Actually, let's explain something very important. Most of the GCC country have non-citizen military personnel in the military himself, which means officially the UAE and other GCC country do have people from other country to work in their army and their police forces. So, and those people are legally responsible, and the government responsible for what they're doing legally.
Okay, but so this is slightly different,
something different, and this is what I'm saying. It's different, so let's discuss it why it's different. This is not the usual trend of these states. These states bring forces, make them work, put the army clothes, work with the flag of the state. So we're talking about something else. And this is what I want to understand. As someone in the region, I would like to understand why would they do it differently this time. I think the only explanation for me, they cannot use them inside the Emirate itself, Abu Dhabi or Dubai or anywhere. It's 800 right now, and they have more buildings and important strategic positions more than they had. So it must be a force that will move around without ethical or even moral consequences into the state. And this is what we should discuss right now. Not talking about the United States law. I think they've been chosen to move freely without legal or to legal responsibility.
Okay, let me pick up your point about moving outside the state, the fact that they would find it very difficult to operate within the UAE. James, that would pose a real problem, wouldn't it? Because there'd be absolutely no difference between what's happening in Libya with Muammar Gaddafi's using mercenaries against his own people. I mean, look, he's heading towards the ICC if they get their way because of it.
Absolutely. I think it's very unlikely that they will be used outside of the UAE, though. I mean, the small numbers, the difficulties with logistics makes it quite unlikely. I think it's much more likely to be an internal security force. If you look at the size of the UAE's population and you look at the size of the armed forces and their relative ineffectiveness compared to other forces in the region, I see this, these potential mercenaries as being more to bolster internal security than as any kind of expeditionary
But what
force.
makes us any different to what's happening in Libya then? The fact that the Libyans are using mercenaries from other parts of the world to turn their guns on their own people?
Well, I suppose the obvious answer to that question is this is a Western company. These are mostly Western mercenaries. Gaddafi's mercenaries come from sub-Saharan Africa and aren't really organised through any kind of a Western contractor in the same way as they are in the UAE. But I think we're potentially being slightly distracted by the whole Blackwater connection. I mean, ultimately, all of the forces in the Gulf rely upon mercenaries to one extent or another. And they always have done, mostly from Pakistan. If you look at the UAE's traditional relationship with Pakistan, they were the first country to recognise the UAE in 1971, and they've traditionally provided troops to both the police and the army, because UAE citizens don't particularly want to serve in the army. They want to be the officer corps at the very least. They refuse to serve in the ranks. So there is a recruitment problem, and I think ultimately, since the US and France and other Western countries will be reluctant to support any kind of internal repression, ultimately perhaps they need to look for other allies, and why not look to the market for that?
Okay, let's briefly remind our viewers about Blackwater's history. The security company was founded in 1997 as Blackwater USA by Eric Prince and L. Clark. Then in October of the same year it was renamed Blackwater Worldwide, and more recently Z Services. The company once had lucrative contracts to protect US officials in Iraq, but it became deeply unpopular in 2007 when some of its guards were involved in a street shootout in Baghdad which left 17 civilians dead. The Iraqi government called it a massacre. It has since been banned from operating in the country, and shortly after, the US State Department decided not to renew its contract to protect its diplomats. Blackwater's reputation has also been tarnished by its activities in Afghanistan. Again, more innocents were killed there. But President Hamid Karzai has decided to allow the company to stay in the country on a training mission for another year. Phyllis, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it, that not only have they decided to call in these foreign forces, if you will, but that they've used this company with links to Blackwater and with the US tie. Why do you think they've decided to go that route?
Well, I think some of it has to do with what James said, that one of the key distinctions that we're dealing with here is that this is a Western, in this case US orchestrated contract with a US-based corporation. Eric Prince comes out of the US corporate scene, who fled away from the accusations of his companies having been involved in these horrific killings of civilians, massive human rights violations. But we're also talking about a government which is allied with the United States, unlike Libya, which had decent relations with Gaddafi until just 2 months ago. But the UAE is a close ally of the United States, so it's a very different dynamic that we're looking at here. And I think that when you see Blackwater, which has become the poster child, if you will, of the dangers of mercenary armies, in a situation where the war in Iraq, Afghanistan as well, have become so thoroughly privatized, you're seeing now a very bold move by, in this case, Eric Prince, at the corporate level to expand. He talked about an empire in the Middle East. That's the term used in the New York Times article, the idea of an empire of mercenaries who would be recruited to go after whoever paid the highest bidding, regardless of human rights considerations, regardless of international law, regardless of any of the considerations of legality. So this is setting up in a very, very open way, as opposed to a covert, hidden way, a rather proud way, an institution designed to absolutely ignore the kinds of restrictions by law, by human rights conventions, etc., that bind other armies. They would not be subject to the Geneva Conventions. The laws of war would not apply. There is no accountability
when
you have this kind of privatization.
Abdulhadi, I mean, that must be a bit of a worry, isn't it? I mean, those men. I'm not sure if there are any women there yet, but they're not doing this for patriotic reasons, are they? I mean, they're doing this because of money.
Of course. Of course, this is the whole issue. Let me bring you back to the history of this region. In the last 200 years, those small, tiny cities with very limited citizens, when they ever face a challenge, they used to bring tribal segment from the desert to protect, to interfere, to help in whatever security issues they face. So it's on all the tradition. However, those tribal segments used to stay and to be part of this city, whatever city they are protecting, or have an agreement to pass or to have whatever goods from that city. So we have this tradition. However, in the modern time, and let me first bring the whole issue. I'm not certain about the information yet that it does include such aspect or how much it's going to go. Knowing the personality of the Crown Prince himself, he involved in the whole idea of having UAE as a strong country and not to accept anymore this occupation of UAE Emirates. But still, the whole issue of morality, the whole issue that those people do not have the flag of this country, and add to that the bad history of this company itself, putting them together bring you to a very tragic conclusions about what their role. However, I would like to see them in much lesser important role, like small protection of certain aspects of places, just in case, because we should remember that Iranian technique is to use small groups inside these countries, especially GCC country. And it's been used in Kuwait, bombing in different places. In Bahrain, where some of the rise was part of it Iranian involvement, and part of it, no, it's the people movement. And also, this is some weird worry that the country could think about. But I have suspicion about the whole thing. It's not something that makes you feel good about it.
Privatizing any war, isn't it, James? Takes it into another league.
Oh, absolutely. But ultimately, we must remember that being a mercenary has always been considered to be the second oldest profession in the world. We're always going to have mercenaries. It's a question of how well we regulate them. And I think Blackwater has changed to some extent since 2007 in particular. And I think these companies are increasingly realising that unless they smarten up their act, they will be regulated by international law. And ultimately, if these mercenaries step too far out of line, we do have the International Criminal Court who could potentially prosecute them for war crimes. So there is ultimately a potential sanction there. But the law is not clear on all these issues yet. And
convict anybody at any stage, and I think Phyllis is agreeing with me on that one.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. The law is there. The International Convention Against the Recruitment of Mercenaries identifies what is a mercenary, what they do being illegal, the recruitment, the payment, all of that is illegal. The problem is the vast majority of powerful countries, of war exporting countries, of military exporting countries, like the United States, like almost all the European countries, except for Germany, like most of the powerful countries have not signed that convention. So the notion of real accountability doesn't exist. It's a matter of political will is the problem. The law is there. When James speaks of holding them accountable under those laws, that certainly is a theoretical possibility. But right now, it's not a realistic political possibility.
Okay, it certainly seems to be the golden area for mercenaries. Thank you very much to all our guests. In Kuwait, Mr. Abdulhadi Al-Ajmi, in Leeds, James Worrell, and in New York, Phyllis Bennis. And of course, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As you know, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.